Hello, everyone, and welcome to this IANA webinar, part of the Intermodal Connect series of webinars. We are really pleased to have some great guests from Tenney Group here today to talk about some really exciting stuff. I'd like to introduce our guests. And we've built a really good relationship with the Tenney Group. They've been very supportive of IANA, and they've also created a great collection of content. And this is part of this year's series of webinars, the M&A Masterclass series. We also did 4 last year with Charles & Co., and those are available on our website. This session today is going to involve 3 key folks from the Tenney Group. Charles Tenney, who is the founder of the Tenney Group, Chandler Lyles, who's the marketing manager, and Spencer Tenney, who is the president and CEO. They are going to take us through what I think you will find to be a really fascinating look at the blueprint, what they call it, how a leading industry M&A firm transitions its ownership to the next generation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chandler. He's going to take us through, and then I'll be back on the other end to help with Q&A.
Thank you.
Great, Hal. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us, everybody. Like Hal said, my name is Chandler Lyles. I'm the marketing manager here for the Tenney Group, and I'm really excited for today's webinar. We have a ton of experience on the line today. Between Charles and Spencer, we have over 75 years of transportation and M&A experience combined. And Hal mentioned last year's webinar series. Today, we're going to be building on, or last year's webinar was really about the plan, right? That was the 7 best practices for succession planning. And today is really going to be about the process. And Spencer and Charles are going to walk you through exactly how they transferred the Tenney Group from Charles being the founder to Spencer being the CEO. And I want to open the floor up to you guys. Spencer, Charles, welcome in. What do you want the folks to know before we jump in here?
I think that it's important for the folks tuning in here today. You know, this isn't easy. And I think that family business is a little messy from time to time. And I think that though our primary business is helping people exit, it's a great passion of ours when it makes sense for folks to transition the business and keep it within the family. It's an amazing, powerful thing. And I think that what we hope from sharing our experience is that people will have some license to do some things, maybe have some conversations that they've been meaning to have and just been kind of putting off. And so I hope that this is something that's an activator for both families and employees within the transportation industry that really care about the families that they work for, and that want to make sure that the best for the business, the best of the family is what continues moving into the future. So we've never done this, so this might be therapy for me and Charles, but we hope it's helpful for you as well.
Sounds like we're about to get vulnerable here. I like it.
Maybe so.
Who's got even money on tiers today? That's the question you've answered in the chat. Well, Charles, I'll kick it off with you. Family business isn't easy. What was it like working with family in those early days? You know, you founded the company and then you brought your son on and your other son as well. Like tell us about those days.
Well, those were good days. As a matter of fact, all 49 of these years have been very good to myself and my wife, Tina. When the boys were younger, we're probably like everybody else on this conversation, anxious to see what they could do. Hopefully they had an interest in our business. And frankly, neither one of them did on the front end. And pleasantly surprised that Spencer come back like the prodigal son after trying the music world and the medical world, decided this is what he wanted to do. And just can't say it's enough. It's just been an honor. Both of my sons I've worked with, and Chase has worked in the business some over the years as well, still does. So as we started to talk about succession, we started early, like most of our folks don't do, clients and so forth. So step one was to start talking about it and start thinking about it. And believe me, I started about several years ago thinking about it. I'm fixing to be 75. I don't have any intention of quitting, but I just wanted to transition. And I looked at outside buyer prospects, had 2 candidates that were amazingly clients that we had sold their business for. And we had a great relationship with them. They came to work for us, and I consider them very highly, especially when initially Spencer was not interested. Chase has a full-time career as a in the football and teaching world in Georgetown, Texas. And he was very honest, Dad, my passion is teaching and coaching. I won't be that person. And after Spencer and I started talking, and I'll let him tell you more about that, mechanics and so forth, once we started getting serious about it. Now, I had asked him, it wasn't one of those things that just, yes or no, Dad. It was one of those things, are you interested? Initially, it was no. And then after some time, I might be interested if certain things happened. And we went from there. And basically what we did is we worked all these years of developing what we call the process of selling transportation businesses and valuing transportation businesses and helping people buy transportation businesses. With the marketing and the selling process, we wanted to test it out on ourselves, be our own guinea pigs to see if the process would work outside of the transportation world. Good news is we don't sell anything but transportation. We never have. It's not in our plan to ever do that. But this process works very well for transportation, and it worked very well for transferring an M&A firm to the next generation. So we started talking seriously probably about 7 years before the transaction took place. And Spencer will be more detailed on that when you talk to him about it.
You're very passionate. You founded this business and you want to make sure the legacy of Tenney Group survives. Like, in your mind, when did it become clear that Spencer was the right person to hand it off to?
Well, first of all, it wasn't just my decision. Tina and I, my wife, had thought about this for a while. She had wanted me to think about retiring early. She just wanted to do that. I've never thought about it one day. Still don't think about it. But one of the things that was most important to us was that we had a chance to see what Spencer could do with the business, with our legacy, with his youth and energy and what he'd learned in the almost 20 years he had worked with the company. We didn't want to miss that. It was very important. A lot of people don't think about that, but to us, it was very important. And also, the more I worked with Spencer and the more we talked about that subject, the more I recognized how much energy he had and how much difference there was in 35 years of age, physical and mental, and all of the different kinds of things that give entrepreneurs the reason for being. It was just so exciting for us. And that might have been one of the overall things that we considered. It's just we wanted to see that happen. And the good news is it has just been a thrill the last 3+ years to see what he's done in terms of growth and expansion and the people we do business with. And very, very rewarding. I will say that. Very, very rewarding and exciting. And oh, by the way,
cool.
One of the most difficult things, it wasn't difficult, but it was psychologically, to going out and getting a job when your first job you've had in 45 years and your son be your boss. Now that was fun, humorous, and here we are. It was great.
Well, he's got you working hard now. I know you're out in Vegas for the TCA annual convention right now. So we appreciate you hanging around and helping us out still. So Spencer, I want to pass it over to you from the son's angle. And, you know, you were an employee at the time. You start having these conversations with your dad / boss. Like, talk to us about that. What were those conversations like in the early days, and how did they evolve sort of over time?
Well, first of all, what I heard through Charles is that the selection of me was tied to my brother bowing out, and I resent that. That's not how I remember this. But you know, in all seriousness, there's a couple of different, and I think this is important for families because it just from a maturity standpoint, there's a few stepping off points where I over a 25-year period where I stepped away from the business. One was because I was so frustrated working with my dad. I'm trying to learn, and I was like, well, how do you do that? How do you approach it that way? And he would say things like, I don't know, I just do it. And that wasn't helpful to a hungry young professional who was wanting to grow. And so I knew that to go develop myself as a professional, I had to get outside of, you know, a small boutique M&A firm and go get some real professional training to grow into the person that I wanted to be. So that was part of it. And then, later on I had some other passions, which probably some families can relate to, history and music, needed to kind of go explore that. And so I think stepping away from the business and having some different perspective gave me a great appreciation for the work that we were doing. And I think once I really got my teeth into how impactful the work my dad was doing and that I would eventually do, it becomes pretty addictive, and it becomes pretty hard to compare with anything else. I mean, I think it really is a special kind of calling that we get to do this. But yeah, when it became serious, and I think the more that I became passionate about, the more clearer my vision for the future of the business became. And that's where, the decision about transitioning ownership became something where we started putting this process in place to develop a strategy. And it wasn't something that happened overnight.
Right. And I know around that time where you guys started thinking about transferring ownership, there started to be a little bit of tension that developed. So Spencer, I'd love to hear, like, what was the tension that was influencing the timing of the sale all those years ago?
Well, I think at the end of this year, it'll be 5 years from the sale. And I think part of it is just getting exposure, being, seeing how firms are run in other M&A and investment banking environments. And there was just a desire for me to go compete, as Charles was talking about. I think there were some things, and here we were business partners at the time, but me without a controlling interest, there was no real ability to go execute on the things that I thought were best for the business and things that really gave me energy. So like a lot of our clients' businesses, when you have business partners and there's 30 years apart in age, a very different appetite for risk and growth. And so I think as we continue to work together and we kind of just stayed where we're at, over time, there was some resentment there, just because I felt like, hey, like I like working together, but this is kind of getting old. Like there's a very specific thing that I feel passionate about, and I need to get let loose, or maybe I need to go do something else that allows me to do something else. And I think that from a communication standpoint, that was kind of the beginning, which is like, hey, I love you. I'll never, leave you, hanging out to dry. But like, I have to be authentic and clear about, what I want from the business. And if we don't want the same things, well, let's figure out how to get that in a different way.
Yeah. Communication is so important, right? And there can be a lot of awkwardness between where the dynamics of a family business and also a small business. And that's why it's so important that we have these different conversations as we prepare to transfer the company. What was the framework you guys used to foster those conversations? Was it just you guys sitting across the table, sort of Texas gunslinger style, going, who's going to flinch first? Or was there actual like open-ended questions you guys went back and forth with?
No, one of the best unexpected blessings, I came across a thought leader in the area of succession planning. He wrote this book called Every Family's Business. And it's a fiction book. It reads, and it's a book that family members will actually read versus more like a textbook succession planning. So that's kind of, it engaged me. So I read this, and it had 12 questions that kind of guided communication around transferring ownership. And so I read it. I encouraged my dad to read it. Then we said, this is terrific. This provides a blueprint for us to communicate about our true intentions for the business. It doesn't mean that we're going to agree. It doesn't mean that there's not even really any expectations to arrive at any conclusions. The main objective is to have the platform from which to communicate so that other things can come from that. So the book written by Tom Dean's PhD. So we would sit down, we committed ourselves to once a year that we would go through this exercise and we would track our responses to these questions. I want to read a couple of these things just to give some context. So like, here's the book right here. It's not my book. I don't get paid, but I've given probably 250 of those books in the last 5 years to other family businesses. Wow. So here's some examples of the books, of the questions that were helpful for us to begin communicating authentically. Here's one. Are you interested in selling your stock? If yes, to whom? Another question. Are you interested in buying stock and acquiring control? Next question. Do you understand and agree that in the interest of maximizing shareholder value, this business can be sold to a third party at any time? Yes or no? That's a tough one for a family. I agree that within the next 60 days, I will place a special compensation formula for my child in the event that the business is sold in the next 5 years? Very specific question, and that aligns the family interest. It's very powerful. Here's another one, and last one. To secure our future prosperity together, we should either A, continue to run our business and invest more money in the company, yes or no, or B, proactively pursue the sale of the company. And so what's really unique about these questions is that as we did this year over year, our responses evolved, and not in any specific direction. And I think that an example of this is my wife started a business around the same time, and she did very, very well. And so my goals kind of evolved, around the finance aspect of it, changed a little bit because it wasn't driven by like, oh, I want to do all these things. And so but again, we continue to have the discipline to have these conversations. It's scheduled the same time every year. We document the files. And I think that what we uncovered was, number one, we had a ton of assumptions about what we were expecting from one another, both directions. And I see this all the time. I will see people that will go 10 years without having a substantive conversation, families, thinking that, maybe this is the child's, lifelong dream to own the business. And I don't want to disappoint him because he's not ready. Well, guess what? Junior hates the business. He's just deathly afraid to tell you that. So I think this is the tool that gave us the ability. And I gave you a very specific example. For us, I know it was important for my dad. Like, he didn't want to be, one of his main themes is he desires to be useful. He'll work probably till he's 100 years old because he wants to be useful. So part of selling the business, the fear was, I want to be useful. Well, that allowed me to say, like, well, I don't have any desire to you to go anywhere. That's the opposite. I just want control. So back to the other question, it's not that I want you out. I just want control so I can go steer the business in a direction that I have been passionate about for a long time. And my hope is that you'll help me do that without making a ton of mistakes along the way. So again, what we're seeing is just kind of uncovering a lot of interference in communication and getting that out of the way. So over that period of time, we really got dialed in terms of getting our interest in alignment.
Were those conversations hard to have in the beginning? Were they awkward?
Charles?
No, I don't think they were awkward. We're very accustomed to those kind of conversations. We have them all the time with our clients. Basically, the majority of these questions in this Every Family's Business book are the same kind of questions that we've dealt with for 45 years with those folks considering the same thing that we were considering. It's just difficult for families to have those conversations. So this book really provides a really neat guideline. So we were very practiced in coaching our clients through these things and asking them tough questions that they may not have considered, just like this book does to the reader. It wasn't tough at all. One thing I would mention that the book did, and we practiced for our clients for years. There's plenty of people who come to us interested in selling their business, and for some reason, it's not the right time for them. Usually, as they leave us, they will ask for advice on the next time we get together. What should I be doing in the next year, 2 or 3 years? Sometimes it's very specific. Sometimes there's lists of things that they need to do in order to make things more favorable for them when they bring the business back to market or when they put it on the market for the first time. And one of those is an annual valuation. People think, well, what the heck? We purposed to do this annually. Spencer and I did, to see if we were accomplishing some of the things that we committed to do that he needed to see with the business, and I wanted to have the business or from the business. So an annual valuation was part of that annual conversation piece there to see if we'd moved the needle any. And what was so neat about that was once we focused on accomplishing the goals that we'd set out for ourselves before it would be right for Spencer and right for me, man, it was pretty impressive what happened in that about a 3-year period, wasn't it, Spencer?
Yeah, I'm hearing this theme sort of develop through these first couple of questions here, where the business owner has to be intentional, they have to have a plan, and then they have to be open to communication. And they can't do what we jokingly refer to sometimes as like sort of clutch their chest as they fall into the grave and they throw the keys to the next generation, and they just have to take over the business at that point. You have to find a way to communicate with each other. I love that. So you guys come to the point where you're ready to sell. You've had those conversations for a couple of years. You're ready to go. But Charles, you went out and had a third party give the business a valuation. I'd love to hear why you did that and why it was so important.
Well, I have 2 sons I need to be concerned about, and I have a wife that I need to be concerned about. And I'm been doing this long enough to understand that a transaction, all that has to do with the transaction, the money exchanges, the liability exchanges, and all the other kinds of things, the thoughts and the expectations and so forth. Sometime down the road, you can doubt what you did, buyers, sellers, family members, whatever. So one of the reasons we did that valuation deal was for our own internal purposes, but the other reason we did it externally. And by the way, one of the best valuation firms in the country did that for us. And the valuation came within a couple $100,000 of what we knew. I mean, we've done these valuations for all these 40 plus years. But one of the key reasons for us doing that was to give, especially Spencer's wife and Chase's wife and their families and so forth, assurances that I didn't take advantage of Spencer. They knew I wouldn't do that, but sometimes things change, and sometimes not the best changes. So just to protect the family and ourselves and anything else down the road, we want some tracks. We wanted some tracks, and for ourselves as well. This is what our thinking was. This is what the value was, and this is how we were doing it. And these are our expectations. And like Spencer said, it's almost 5 years. And if ever our plan worked out well, according to the plan, this is a pretty good model to look at. We haven't had an argument won or anything. I just let Spencer do everything. Don't have to make any decision whatsoever. It works out really well.
Yeah.
What a pro business owner, just delegating left and right. So the sale goes through, and then, Spencer's got the keys for 4 months, and then something happened. Spencer, I'd love if you would share that story with everybody and explain why this process was so important and how it could have gone way worse for everybody.
Yeah. So, you can imagine, we closed the business. And I want to make sure that we emphasize this was a purchase. This wasn't a gift. And it was very clear from even well before I even got involved in the process that the business would be sold to whoever was the right successor if they were interested in the business. And so part of our planning was to make sure that we were satisfying his financial objectives. And so we had to get to the business to the place that it would do that. And we did. And so, you have us, my wife, my mom, and my dad, we're signing papers and doing pictures. And then 4 short months later, I'm getting a call on a Saturday morning, beautiful day, pick up the phone. It's an EMT. And he says, Spencer, I've got your dad with me. You're going to have to come to the hospital. He's been in a motorcycle accident, and you just need to get here pretty quick. And so I'm there going to my mom. I'm having to tell my mom what's going on. I'm picking her up, and we're driving 40 minutes. My dad's been out on a motorcycle and had an accident. And, at that point, nobody's thinking about business. You're just thinking about, people you care about. But doing what we do, we've seen the worst of things in terms of how life circumstances can totally disrupt families. And so why this was significant is because, we've been doing this, but ultimately only the founder can really pull the trigger on a transition of ownership. It's the only way that it's going to happen. And there was, for whatever reason, my dad was like, hey, this needs to get happened. We've done the prep. Now's the time. It has to get done. And so following his lead, we funded and we did what had to get done. And then we have this accident. And had we not done those things, what would have been different? Well, I would have been in a minority control situation with my mom, who doesn't know anything about our business, which more than likely would have affected that relationship in a positive way. And if it, and like any other family, probably would have, looped my brother back into the business and his wife. And now we have all this kind of crazy things that, you just don't ever want to invite into that type of process. And, once we realized that my dad was going to be okay, I mean, one of my first thoughts was, I'm so glad that's something that we're not worrying about right now because we took care of business. The only business that we really have to focus on is just getting my dad healthy. And, and he was, maybe 6 months later, he's back in the business, wheeling, dealing like good old times. But, I think part of that healing was, and how fast he bounced back was because he took care of business in terms of the family. The family was protected at that point, that there was nothing that circumstantially could have, not disrupted the business, but permanent effect on your family, putting that type of stress on them.
Took a very stressful situation and just really, it eliminated a lot of the stress that didn't need to be there in that moment.
Yeah. And I think that why we're so grateful for that is because we have seen a lot of folks that have been in that situation and it just didn't work out that way. And so I think that that's one of the main reasons that we're passionate about this process, which again, it's not meant to be for every family, but every family should be going through this process and going through these questions and having these conversations because quite frankly, it's the most sure way to protect your family, protect your business, protect your wealth.
So Charles, transferring back over to you, you are the founder of the Tenney Group. And so you speak these other business owners' language, their hearts. I would love to hear your opinions and thoughts about why do founders find it difficult to transfer ownership to the next generation or even transfer it to an outside party?
One of the most common terms we hear over all these years is the term "my baby." Owners, no matter who they are, no matter how old they are, doesn't matter what sex they are, these businesses are my baby. And relinquishing your baby is tough. I don't know anybody, unless they were in bad shape and it was the number one thing they wanted to do was get rid of it for some reason. But for the most part, these entrepreneurial type folks that have worked 20, 30, 40 years building a business, the idea of handing that over to somebody else, whether it's family or anybody, the idea of their legacy being shut down overnight, their relevance, their value, their usefulness, their worry, stress, what will I do? What can I do? Who will ever want me? I can't play golf all day type questions. It's just difficult. You spent more time over these years than you probably have with your wife or your husband. And think about it. That's true. And turning it over to somebody, it's particularly about culture. I will mention that. We have a particular culture in our business. And it was one of the wonderful things about the transition that we did. I was very comfortable that the culture that we created over all these years would be carried forward. And that culture is not just one thing. We have some precepts that we appreciate very much in our business. One of them is excellence, no question about it. Ideas about excellence are sharper and finer and more directed than mine. Family is one of them. I've done some things in this business over all these years that people told me wouldn't work, it wouldn't be successful. And one of them has to do with the amount of travel that I'd be willing to do. And I committed to my wife and my boys when they were about 8 or 9 years old that I wouldn't travel more than 20% of the time. In this business, that's unheard of. But when you put family first, you figure out ways to do things. Chandler, you appreciate this. You're one of the newest guys in the block. You didn't have much problem seeing that. Nobody just went out and told you, hey, this is what we do. I think you can see it if you talk to anybody in our business. But excellence, family, the spiritual aspect of our business, and how we put God in our work and our families and in our play, I have no worries whatsoever that heritage was going to be carried forward.
So do you have a time that you can think of where a business didn't go through this process with communications and then there was a really muddled transition between business owners?
Well, honestly, our purpose here is to communicate how important communication is and how important some kind of process is. So not to bring too much of a downer to this conversation. Yes, we've seen a lot of very terrible things happen to folks that just can't have that conversation with their family. And there's all kinds of consequences, and a lot of them are very dire. I'll give you an example of one down in Louisiana. This couple, 70-year-old couple, came to us, have a business, 40-something years old, very good business, mid-sized business. And they've told us on the front end, our son's not capable of running this business. We have to have the money from this business to live the life that we want to live moving forward. We want to spend time with our grandkids and we want to travel. That was their goals. So in the process of conversations, we never got the business listed. But the son found out that they had no intention of having conversations with him about anything. He went out, started the business within 6 months, took it, the business that they saw he could not run, took the business away from him and started his own business. Alienated the companies, almost killed the parents because of grief. Now that's one of the worst case scenarios, but that's not unusual at all. It's just because people won't talk. And that's, by the way, that's not just for family. That's for like key people in your organization that would be threatened by the same thing if they said, well, John Smith's been working with me for 13, 15 years. That person might be thinking about he's in the path for at least some equity position in business and go out and do the same. But there's plenty of times that happens. So I just say, hey, you've got to make sure you have those tough conversations. And that book, I don't get any commission on the books either. That and other books like those are very good for people. It's not like we haven't done this before. Selling businesses, we've been doing it for, next year be 50 years. Believe me, they were doing it before I came along. And so it's not secret stuff. If you just search around, it's out there. And people come to us all the time with no intention whatsoever to just get information for some time down the road. And we're happy to do that. You know, passion, Spencer mentioned earlier, just be candid with you. I got in this business to make money, and it served me very well making money. But I've been doing this for a long, long time, and money's not the reason to stay in it. Passion about being able to help somebody who knows a whole lot about transportation and has been very successful in their career come to a lifetime where they know nothing handling this step. Passion moved from way above the money, monetary part of what we do. We stay in this because we do something that very few people in this world can do. And I'm not just saying the Tenney group, I'm saying people that do what we do, M&A work, help people get rewarded in several different ways when they decide to exit the business and go on to the next thing. That's the work. Spencer's real quick to quote Teddy Roosevelt when he says the greatest prize that life has to offer is to do work, or to work hard at work worth doing. And believe me, if there's everything about this business that it is work worth doing.
I'll tell you, I might be a bad marketing manager as much as you guys are saying, you know, I don't get any commission on this and I don't get it. Like, I feel like I need to go back and revisit my strategy here a little bit. Spencer, would you, do you want to expand on anything Charles just said there?
No, I mean, I think there's some things that we might address, but maybe we'll just move on to the next question. I'll try to contribute on another topic.
Yeah, sure. So what encouragement would you guys give to a transportation owner that's looking to transition their business, whether it be to the next generation or to an outside party?
I think for me, like this, if you can get your mind to transition from this is something of dread to this is something that a conversation that I get to have with people that I care about, and not many people get to do this. And if you can, you know, shift the mindset to go that direction, some really exciting things can happen. Number one is discovery. You can learn some things about one another that you never understood, in terms of why we do the business, what you're passionate about, why you're passionate about it. There's also an opportunity to educate. I think that, like, when we're going through these questions and we were preparing this and we're doing these valuations, think about what's happening here from an educational standpoint. You know, my dad is equipping me to understand the connection between my work and how that drives business value. So there's a benefit to the business, but there's also a benefit from education where I'm widening my skill set and I'm becoming more valuable to this company or to another company. So the teaching opportunity is something that you can't really put a price tag on. And I think that that's something that if owners and founders can look at it like this, then it kind of unlocks some possibilities and some attitudes that can really unearth some amazing things, some blessings that can happen. So I think that's the first part. And the other part of it is, there were times as we were going through these things, and I mentioned like where my position was like, well, no, like when my wife's business started doing really well, and I'm like, maybe I don't want to do this because maybe this changes how we want to do life together. And so like in that particular year when we're going through this, my attitude was a little bit different. But I think that when we give each other license that like these aren't the 10 commandments, they're not locked in stone. It's designed to be a fluid conversation. And I think when you frame that conversation to the next generation, number one, you may not, or probably are not likely going to get 100% authentic feedback that first go around, because it takes a discipline and trust to start speaking authentically about what you want from the business. And so I think that when families can be, step one, develop the discipline so that you can create trust, so that you can get authentic feedback. And when you do, a lot of things can happen. Most notably, we identify if there is an interest in being a successor. Okay, well, we can also identify if there's some gaps in training that we need to address in order for you to be successful. And so, because people come to me all the time, they're like, it would be great if my son or daughter wanted to take over the business, but they just don't have what it takes. I was like, well, did you have a hand in that? Have you tried at all to provide a path to get them equipped at the point where it could be a possibility? And so I think that those are the types of conversations that, again, if we're viewing this as a process and not just a stagnant plan, that's where we can really kind of change the stars that are out in front of us and really kind of map it out however we want.
All right. Last question here, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. Charles, I'll start with you. If the attendees today could take one thing away, what's the one thing you would hope they leave with after watching this webinar?
Well, I'm kind of selfish about this, but it's whether we're involved or not. It's this communication. It's this forcing yourself to address issues around the possibility of exiting, whether it's 6 months from now, 6 years from now, but to answer some of these questions. They're hard, they're difficult, but they're productive and they're rewarding. And, entrepreneurs are typically, and I is one, so I can appreciate it. We're accustomed to pretty much dictating what's going on, maybe get some advice from our key people and so forth, but the ultimate decision is yours to make. And this is one of the most difficult decisions, most valuable decisions that have the most to do with the future of business owners. So it's one that deserves to have the kind of attention to answer to the future. So I would say the conversation we're talking about is the most important thing. And you think that it's easy to have that. It's easy to cause people to have that, but it's not. The majority of the people that we're talking to here won't have that conversation when the time comes. It's a secretive time. Businesses don't get sold in openness. You don't put a tube out in front of a business with a for sale sign on it. So the whole mystique about transactions is mysterious and secretive and private, but not this conversation. Have this conversation. That's what I would share with people.
In my head, when you said that, I just imagined one of those wacky inflatable arm guys out front with a sign that said business for sale, just sort of whipping it back and forth. Spencer, over to you. What's the one takeaway you hope people take away from this?
I think that, one of the beautiful things about our industry is just coming back from TCA in Las Vegas, and you have employees that are non-family members that have been loyal, in some cases for decades, to a family-owned business. And it's those people who, in many cases, have the clearest lens into the dynamics of the family and what is or what isn't going to allow that family business to be successful moving into the future. And so I think my encouragement to both those people and the founders themselves is to make the connection that in the absence of having these conversations, it's very difficult for business to thrive and to grow. And if the business is not thriving and growing, then you're not likely to be able to retain your best and most talented people that will allow the business to be in the future. And you see it in terms of just the energy from people that are like, I don't know how much longer I can hang around because clearly we're not going anywhere. Everybody's dug in, nobody's changing, nobody's doing anything, but I got to go at some point realize my potential as a professional in this industry. And so I think the encouragement is people take notice, both with family, high level leadership team, in terms of what's being done to ensure that there is a succession strategy and a plan in place. And by doing that and in looping in that leadership team into that process in terms of communicating, can only unleash more possibilities to develop trust and to realize the business's full potential, retain people, and so forth. So if you're that person that really wants to or feels the need or is just in a tough spot, be encouraged. We've seen a lot of family businesses with the right material, with the right roadmap, take action and turn businesses around, open up opportunities. It can happen, so be encouraged.
That's great. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on and being vulnerable. And I didn't get any tears out of anybody, so I feel like next time I'm going to have to turn up the dial on the intensity of the questions. But thank you so much, Hal. I'm going to pass it back over to you. I think we've got some questions from the audience here.
Yeah, we do.
We'll jump in.
Thanks, Chandler, and Charles and Spencer. Thanks so much for talking us through that. It's a fascinating story. I've heard pieces of it before, but I tell you what, it's really great to have it all kind of strung together, and it really highlights all of the challenges and the opportunities that you guys deal with in your business every day. And you really get to speak from something that you know, and it's not just the experience of your combined wisdom gained from helping people sell and buy businesses, but also going through it yourself. Here's a question, Spencer, why don't you kick it off? But I think, obviously just kind of round robin it, but it touches on that last piece that you mentioned about employees and the role of employees. And I know that we touched on this in a session previously around the role of good leaders trusting their employees and having good people under you. But here's a different spin on it. How can employees encourage resistant families to take action around succession planning? Kind of get that ball rolling.
I mean, honestly, one of the most non-threatening deals is to reference this. If you're on this call and you have a family that you're concerned about, I think one of the things is just, hey, I was part of this situation and they kept referencing this book. I think you should check this out. And again, it's a fiction book. It's very consumable, but that's at least a starting place. That from a non-threatening, like, hey, I don't know what you may already have this button down, but this seemed like something that was really helping a lot of people out. So I just went and got it for you. And I'd love to talk about it. I read it myself. I'd love to talk it with you, and just kind of, see what this is all about. I think that's a very soft approach of doing that. I do think that there's also another approach where you can be pretty direct, which is to say like, hey, given the current environment in terms of attracting and recruiting top talent, I really feel like we need a more coherent strategy around succession. Like, what are we doing? I want to be a part of that and help you drive that and make sure that we have the best business possible moving into the future. It's very relevant, very timely, and that's another approach that I think you can start that conversation with.
And just a kind of quick follow on with that, is there an optimal time to start talking, either, the owner and the families talking about succession planning or the employees with the owner structure? But is there an optimal time to start talking about succession planning?
No, I think it's something that should be going. And this goes back to, the session that we did last year, which is that this is ongoing. I think that because people look at this as like, when I die or whatever this is, like that's the complete wrong way to look at this. The way that we're looking at this is as far as this is the process of developing strategic options, which empower you, right? So if we have a systematic process, so if it was, let's just say if it wasn't, traditionally it isn't just one family member or one potential successor. There could be several different siblings along with key management team members that are just as qualified, probably more qualified candidates that are part of the same conversation. And so I think that that's an ongoing deal. And I think one of the things that my dad modeled out pretty early on, like there's no way I was ready, but he was demonstrating to my brother and I, like, this is going to get sold at some point. I'm developing successors. So there was 2 iterations of that were highly qualified to come in. It ultimately didn't end up being a fit, but it was very public. And because of that, we were conditioned, okay, this is the way that it is. And we were able to kind of fall in line and understand that that's what the expectation is. And if I want to be a potential successor, I need to count on being in a position to buy it at some point. So I think that all starts day one. I mean, you can start that tomorrow. It's not that you're going to be extremely mature, but starting these conversations, I think that should be done immediately.
Yeah, I think one thing that really stood out and was underscored a lot of stuff of what you said, but really what Charles really focused in on is that clear, honest communication obviously seems to just be at the core of this process, and not spinning yarns and not, soft selling things and kind of backing into stuff, but really, being honest. That really is coming across in what you guys are saying. So you guys are about 5 years out, right, from when you made that transition. Now you've got that kind of hindsight, that experience, in your back pocket now, to be able to look back and say, oh man, maybe we would have done this or that differently. Is there anything that comes to mind about your process and how you applied it to your own business that you might do differently now that you've got that perspective?
Well, I would offer this. Your question that you just asked and Spencer just answered, the answer would be start earlier. And not because we needed it for the transaction part, but because of how many benefits this preparation, how valuable it is for your business. You can't go through these conversations and and apply any of them that doesn't make your business better for the time when you do decide to exit. And the other side of the deal is you have no promise about tomorrow whatsoever. Over the years, Spencer mentioned it earlier, we have seen almost every kind of reason to start this process today. Number one, if for nothing else, your business will be better for it. It'll be more valuable, it'll be more secure, and all the other things we talked about. But talk about a comfort level from an owner's perspective, having known that you've had that conversation, having known that you've discovered the things, you need that right now because it makes life so much better for you. People have it tied to age and energy. That's because you have to do that. You want to have a better business, you want to have a better organization, you want to have a more valuable company someday. Forget about the death part, the exit for that reason, and just like any other business plan, there's probably not anything. There's very few things that can be more valuable to a business owner than to start this process early on, to make life better, to make the future financial situation of you and your bride or your spouse of some sort better, and to make your family and children and grandchildren better. That's all the motivation you need.
That really does sum it up. I ride as well, and I'm glad to hear that you recovered well from your accident. But one of the things that always goes through my mind is life is short. You have to live accordingly, and you need to be mindful of the opportunities that you have at hand and optimize them. And I think it really does make a whole lot of sense. Someone once said that the best advice is the things that are the most common sense, right? But you need to have somebody that you trust tell it to you, so you go, oh yeah, you're right. And going through these processes really makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. Where do you see business owners who have good intentions but kind of fail to promote the interests of their families and employees? Like, how does that affect that transition process?
I'll take that. I think that where we see a lot of good intentions is to put together a very tax efficient, highly technical plan for transferring ownership that, like I said, it's highly tax efficient driven, the tax strategy driven. Right. And an example of this, I was speaking to a trucking business owner out west, maybe, I don't know, 80 to 100 million in annual revenue. And they were talking about succession planning, and he had heard something about what we're doing. He's like, man, I kind of feel like we're pretty deep into it. And said, well, we're about to gift the shares of the business to 8 different cousins. And I go, really? Do they know this? And he said, no, they don't know. I was like, okay.
It's a great Christmas present.
And I was like, and I said, do you think that they actually want that? And I was like, and I'm just like looking in my mind for the next 50 years, the incredible tension and fights that will inevitably unfold within this family. Maybe you have 8 equal business partners that don't even know each other barely, and then now they're in business together because the 4 brothers are passing it down. And so I think that's where the good intentions comes up. Like they think that they're providing good stewardship by making sure that they avoid taxes, where they should have done is, hey, before we go pay $200,000 for an amazing tax strategy, let's go ask these 8 individuals, grown-ups, adults, if they actually want this business. And then we'll decide if we want to spend this money on a tax efficient strategy that is a time bomb. So I think that's the issue. We know tremendous professionals that can provide unbelievable value from a tax standpoint, but you should have a sequence about how you go about doing this. And it's not that complicated. Just start some frequent scheduled communication, and then you'll find out if those have any relevance whatsoever. They may tell you in 5 minutes that, oh, I don't need to do anything except go to the open market because nobody wants it. They've just been afraid to tell me. So I think that's the main thing that I would say.
That makes good sense. And here we're coming on up, but let me just get one last question in. So I think it's pretty interesting. What's the hardest thing about the process? Is there one piece that you think is the hardest for folks that are contemplating selling?
Well, I can tell you from the next gen perspective, and I think I think that it's to, how do you communicate? Like, hey, it's not that I have a problem with the business. I just have a different vision. I want something different from what you want from the business, and here's what it looks like. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that is easy for anyone to communicate well, for someone that you have a tremendous amount of respect for and you've worked with. But in order to have conversations like this, I mean, think about how much trust is created just in that moment when it's said like, hey, I appreciate so much about what we're doing. Here's the vision that I see, and this is what I'm getting energy from. And it's important for me because I care about you, that you understand what that is. And there may or may not be alignment today, but I think in order to kind of move in that direction, I have to be open and honest about what my expectations are. I think that's the hardest thing. And so that's why when we start talking about have these conversations early, I don't think it's really even realistic for that level of transparency to kind of get out of your body and out of your mouth until you've kind of gone through this discipline a couple of times. And so I think that's why there's so much emphasis on just kind of getting into this practice and doing it.
That makes loads of sense. I think is a nice way to kind of wrap this up. We are unfortunately out of time, but gents, I really appreciate you spending this time with us today and taking us through the sort of blueprint for getting a family business ready for sale. And I do want to encourage folks to stick with us because we've got 3 more sessions coming up in the rest of the year. On May 11th, we're going to touch on 16 reasons your trucking business won't sell, which I think is going to be really interesting. Maybe a little hard to hear for some folks, but really important. As we heard today, got to be honest. The art of responding to an unsolicited offer, they happen all the time, more and more. How do you do that? We'll be touching on that in August, on the 10th of August. And then we're going to close out the year with 9 differentiators that separate acquisitions winners from losers. How do you make that a team? How do you make sure that you finish on top? Gentlemen, thank you very much for sharing your time and your insights with us. And we appreciate all of you joining us today on this sponsored IANA webinar from Tenney Group. But please come back and see us again sometime soon with an IANA webinar, The Connecting Force Behind Intermodal Freight. Take care, folks.